Retail figures drop, yet tourist numbers are going up. Another high-sea confrontation between China and Vietnam.
Brazil is a country that I would love to go in. I would love to live in Brazil.
Edward Snowden pondering his next move.
Good evening. April saw the biggest fall in retail figures in 5 years. A government spokesman said it's due partly to a drop in spending by tourists. As Jenny Lam reports, that's expected to further fuel the debate over a possible move to reduce mainland visitors and the impact on the local economy.
More mainland tourists means more spending. That's what the retail industry has been arguing and asking the government not to limit the number of mainland tourists. But the latest figures show that may not be the case. Retail sales fell by 9.8% year-on-year to $38.8 billion in April. Sales figures have been falling for 3 straight months now, and this was the biggest drop since February 2009. The largest reductions were in the sale of jewellery, watches and valuable gifts. The government spokesman said this shows moderation in visitor spending after a prolonged period of brisk growth. But there has been double-digit growth in the percentage of mainland tourists in the past year. The number of visitor arrivals was about 4 million every month in 2014, totaling nearly 15 million through April. About 10 million were solo visitors, not as members of tour groups, and that represents a 17% increase. Legislator Vincent Fang of the wholesale and retail sector suggests that a clampdown on corruption on the mainland might have reduced the appetite for luxury items. Plus, many of the visitors have been to Hong Kong a number of times already, and they have simply exhausted their shopping options. Neo-Democrats legislator Gary Fan is in favour of restricting the number of mainland visitors. He believes such a move will have a limited impact on the retail trade, and the answer for Hong Kong, he suggests, is to stop relying on tourism spending but come up with alternative ways of supporting the economy. And Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying said various sectors of society have provided useful information as the government considers whether to impose a cap on the number of mainland tourists. Jenny Lam, TVB News.
Residents of Kai Ching Estate are still reeling from the shooting there last weekend. Social workers are expected there later tonight to provide counseling services. Meanwhile, authorities are focusing on how the suspected shooter got hold of his weapons and ammunition. João de Silva reports.
The former wife and daughter of the suspect, Lee Tak-yan, identified his body at a mortuary in Sha Tin today. They then returned to the mainland. Sources say police have contacted Lee's family but have not taken any statements from them so far. At Kai Ching Estate, where the shootout took place, a shattered window at the 10th floor unit where the suspect was locked in a confrontation with police. Residents at the building recall the horror. She heard the clear sound of gunshots from where she takes the lifts every day. Another resident who lives 2 floors below said her 6-year-old child is still shaken by what happened.
When I live here, just the gunshot happened. I just hear the gunshot. My children were scared. Every day he want to watch the news.
Days after the alleged murder and ensuing shootout, residents of the Lok Ching house are still in shock, with some even saying that they are afraid to share the lift with strangers. And that is why social workers are expected here later today to provide counseling services. Authorities say Lee shot dead an air conditioning technician on the 21st floor of the building before taking his own life. The chief executive today praised the police force's swift response and thanked people in the neighborhood for their cooperation. Leung Chun-ying said officers are concerned about how the suspected gunman managed to get hold of the weapons and ammunition found at his home.
啱發生呢個個別案件所
And the Secretary for Security, John Lee, noted that Hong Kong has strict gun control laws in place. He said the source of the guns and ammunition used by the suspects is one of the lines of investigation being pursued by the police. Joan Da Silva, TVB News.
China has reportedly beefed up its military presence in the South China Sea in response to an ongoing territorial dispute with Vietnam. Hanoi says it will take Beijing to court over the dispute, but analysts believe this will have little impact on China's policy of securing access to waters it believes it has a right to develop. Tony Sabine reports.
Amid threats of legal action against China over a bitter territorial dispute in the South China Sea, Vietnam has released footage purportedly showing a Chinese ship harassing a Vietnamese vessel in those disputed waters. The two vessels later collided with each other, although no injuries were reported. According to Vietnamese state media, the incident happened on Sunday. Beijing hit back, saying it all began with the Vietnamese vessel harassing the Chinese ship. At the heart of the argument is Vietnam's objection to a Chinese oil rig near the Paracel Islands, or Seychelles, which Hanoi says is in waters which it has exclusive economic rights to. The rig deployment a month ago infuriated Hanoi and set off violent anti-China protests that have soured ties between the neighbouring countries that do a lot of trade with each other. Analysts say the dispute will hurt economic links between the two, although one admitted that China's image as a manufacturing centre was less affected.
Vietnam is often touted as an alternative destination, but look at the protests that we had there, which were in a much more sort of uncontrolled and much more destructive way.
Since the rig was set up, Vietnam has sent patrol ships to confront it, while China has deployed scores of vessels to protect the structure. Last week, Hanoi accused the crew of a Chinese vessel of ramming a wooden Vietnamese boat near the controversial rig. Tony Sabine, TVB News.
The Brazilian Foreign Ministry says it has not received a formal request for asylum from whistleblower Edward Snowden. This after the former contractor for the U.S. National Security Agency said on Brazilian television he had sent a petition to Brazil requesting asylum. Alan Buchnia reports.
Brazil is a country that I would love to go in. I would love to live in Brazil.
Snowden is living in Moscow under temporary asylum that's due to expire in August. He's wanted on espionage charges in the U.S. after leaking documents that revealed the scope of U.S. spying worldwide. He told Brazilian television he would not trade information for asylum in Brazil.
Absolutely not. I could not be more clear. First off, I don't have any documents to offer. Secondly, even if I did, I would never trade secret information or cooperate with some government in exchange for asylum. Asylum has to be granted on humanitarian grounds. It has to be granted to protect political rights or the right to safety.
While the Brazilian government has said it's not yet received a formal request, according to Brazilian media, the country has no plans to grant asylum to Snowden. Meanwhile, Oscar-winning film director Oliver Stone is planning to make a movie about Snowden's story. He bought the screen rights to a book written by Guardian newspaper journalist Luke Harding.
Snowden is a hero to me. Edward Snowden is a hero because he did this not for profit, not to give give secrets away that could hurt our country, supposedly. I haven't seen one evidence of that. He's doing it out of conscience. I mean, he sacrificed his life for this.
But Stone will have some deep-pocketed competition. Last month, writer Glenn Greenwald, who's now based in Brazil, sold the big screen rights to a book he's written about Snowden to Sony Pictures. Alan Buchnia, TVB News.
Russia has called for an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council and for an immediate end to deadly clashes in eastern Ukraine. Russia had blocked any Security Council action for months before the announcement. Following a closed-door meeting yesterday, Moscow's ambassador to the UN, Vitaly Churkin, called for a sustainable ceasefire between Ukrainian troops and separatist rebels. The move was immediately denounced by the U.S. and Ukraine as hypocritical. The Ukrainian UN envoy called it cynical and immoral, saying Russian mercenaries were flooding into eastern Ukraine. All this comes as U.S. President Barack Obama arrived in Poland for a key European visit. He's called on Congress to back a $1 billion effort to boost American military presence across the continent.
Spain's cabinet is meeting to discuss the legal details that would allow King Juan Carlos to abdicate and pass on the throne to his son. The king's announcement yesterday has sparked fresh calls to end the monarchy. Thousands of people took to the streets in Madrid, Barcelona, and several other cities to demand a referendum on whether Spain should be a republic or not. Crown Prince Philippe is expected to succeed his father. He would be known as King Philippe IV once crowned. The Palestinian president officially swore in a national unity government yesterday. While the move ended a crippling 7-year split between rival factions Fatah and Hamas, it also triggered threats of retaliation from Israel.
In the occupied West Bank, President Mahmoud Abbas swore in the new unity government. For 7 years, Hamas, which advocates Israel's destruction, has run the Gaza Strip since seizing the territory from Abbas's Fatah forces at the end of a civil war in 2007. Numerous reconciliation efforts over power sharing failed in the past. Still dependent on foreign aid, Abbas hopes Western powers will accept the 17-member cabinet, which he insists are politically unaffiliated technocrats. Abbas described the move as a black page in their history being turned forever. As Palestinians celebrated the unity government, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu urged the world not to be fooled, insisting Hamas is a front for terrorism. He said from now on, the Palestinian government is responsible for any attacks against Israelis originating from the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Netanyahu's government insists Palestinians need to choose between peace with Israel or Hamas, but they can't have it both ways.
Today, President Abbas took a giant step backwards, away from peace. He embraced a ruthless terrorist organization directly responsible for the murder of hundreds of innocent civilians and a group that calls for my country's destruction. Now, the international community simply cannot continue with business as usual.
The United States, which has been brokering peace talks between the two sides, pledged support for the unity government, but with a watchful eye.
Based on what we know now, we intend to work with this government, but we'll be watching closely to ensure that it upholds the principles that President Abbas reiterated today.
Abbas swears the new unity government will strive to pursue peace despite Hamas's refusal to accept coexistence with Israel.
And still ahead in our newscast, how Hong Kong people look at June 4th, 25 years on. Colombian star Radamel Falcao ruled out of the World Cup. And meet a 91-year-old marathon runner.
Monsoons that cause rivers to rise by 4 meters.
A few weeks ago, this was dry land. Coatis running across it. Now it's covered in water, as far as the eye can see.
And surviving the lights of death. Tonight, Wing Ching Photo Supply's 40th anniversary presents Wild Brazil at 9:30 on Pearl Spectacular. When the girl of his dreams,
Wallace and I are engaged to be married,
turns out to be a serial killer.
Your bones are as good as toasty.
Action Gromit. Sunday, Wallace and Gromit in A Matter of Love and Death. Sunday night at 8:30 on Pearl.
We lost our son in a traffic accident. We miss him. He had told us of his intention to be an organ donor, so we honored his wish.
I want to help others too. I will share this act of love.
Support organ donation. Register online.
Family support is important.
It could be the costliest natural catastrophe in the history of our planet.
We're not prepared for it.
That wave could be as much as a kilometre high.